Warning, you're about to embark on a journey into social psychology. What you learn in this video may truly challenge your views and the understandings of yourself. You may be confronted with uncomfortable truths and asked to remove preconceived notions that you've long held, many of which were taught you by a society full of biases. Learning social psychology may rewrite your personal script and threaten your self-esteem. Remember, there may be happiness in willful ignorance. It's not too late to turn back now.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
I have been so frustrated with people that I've just wanted to shake them. Because they're so stubborn and they have an unwillingness to let go of some of their preconceived notions. Well, that's what social psychology is. You getting the opportunity to learn something that shakes yourself.
Everything's gonna be all right.
Shakes you to the core, asks you to loosen up. So if you continue from this point on, make sure you have a willingness to learn and really look deep within yourselves and question who you are and what makes you, you.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Obviously, I love talking about this stuff, which is why I love social psychology. Today in social psychology, we're going to talk all about the self. There's a whole bunch of vocabulary terms that have the word self in it. We're going to talk about self-concept, self-esteem, self-serving bias, self-presentation, and also self-control. This and more. So without further ado, let's get into this thing. Have you ever woken up just to find out you have a nasty zit on your face? And you think, well, this day's pretty much ruined because when I go to work or school, everyone's gonna notice my zit. They're gonna make comments. And then once you get to work or school, you notice no one's saying anything. So you assume they're talking behind your back all about it. But are they really? The spotlight effect is the concept. You're kind of the star of your own television show, that there's one camera and you're front and center. Research has shown this simply isn't true. They had people wear really ridiculous sweatshirts and they assumed everyone would notice. In fact, in the middle of this experiment, they had participants switch the sweatshirts they were wearing, and very few people even noticed that they switched clothing. People typically don't give a damn.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
This is also known as the imaginary audience. Again, that you're center stage. But that's how people view you physically. But what about emotionally? Can people really tell when you're sad or angry or definitely nervous? We tend to think so, more so than we realize. Research has shown something known as the illusion of transparency, that we believe our emotions are a lot more transparent than they actually are. Here's something very valuable. There was research done by Savalinsky and Govovich in 2003, I think my notes say. Their experiment showed that when you feel that people know you're nervous, you actually feel more nervous. So when people are taught the illusion of transparency, that people can't actually tell what your emotions are, that actually helps you give your speech. So by learning this in social psychology right now, by watching this video, I'm helping you do better in your speeches.
You're welcome.
You need to understand, people can't tell how nervous you actually are. I mean, obviously, if you're sweating bullets and you can't stop shaking and your voice starts quivering and you just start puking everywhere, of course they're gonna know you're nervous. But within reason, people can't tell how nervous you are. So stay strong and keep on pushing through that speech you have.
Some people out there in our nation don't have that, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and
so this is how people perceive you when they look at you, but what about you looking at yourself? Let's do a little class exercise. I want you to get a pen and paper, or just do it in your mind, and I want you to answer the following 5 questions. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And who am I? I want you to list 5 things that describe you as you are. And each of those answers should start with I am. What you just wrote down is known as your self-concept. It's how you literally describe yourself. Now look at what you wrote down or look at what you thought. Were you talking about physical descriptions? Were you talking about I'm tall, white, handsome, I'm ugly, got a zit on my face? Was it a physical description? What about internal qualities? If you've ever taken any psychology or personality class, I recommend it, then you probably have so many different ways to describe your internal personality. Openness, conscientiousness, your organizational skills, extroversion, your agreeableness, how emotional are you? Did you write any of those down? Or did you write your activities? I'm good at sports. I teach. Really good with science. I'm a swimmer. Or did you list some of your roles? I'm a son. I'm a father. I'm a mother, daughter, pastor, teacher, business person. Or did you mention group membership? For instance, Christianity, the NRA, Democrat. There's so many different categories that fall within our self-concept. So look at the list you made. And you may even ask yourself, if this is what I thought of, maybe that is what's most important to me. At least that's what's most important about myself today. Some of us rely on others for our own self-concept. What? I rely on others for myself? Yes, it's known as social comparison. What? For instance, you may not think you're a really fast person until you start running around with everyone else and you realize, oh my goodness, I'm so much faster than all these people. Or it could be the other way around. Why is everyone so much faster than me? You compare yourself to everyone else. And typically, that's where we kind of grow into our niche, at least in an individualistic society. Professor Girding, what do you mean by individualistic society? Great question. What I mean is opposed to collectivistic. Who do you want to succeed more than anyone else? If the answer is yourself, well then that's a good indication that you are in an individualistic culture. Imagine you're in a society where you care more about your family or the group. You're in class right now. Who do you want to have the highest grade? Yourself. But imagine a situation where you're thinking, no, I want the class as a whole to do well. You are a huge product of your culture, your society. Imagine you, but having been raised somewhere else. You were raised in Canada instead of America, let alone maybe you were raised in Timbuktu or Australia or someplace way different than where you were raised. Do you think you'll be a little bit different? Of course. So how accurate is your self-concept if it's constantly being informed by those around you? Well, there's a lot of flaws in your self-concept. One of those is the planning fallacy. There's so much evidence among so many people of the planning fallacy. It really showcases our inability to be able to predict how long it will take us to complete tasks. No worries, I will be there soon. I'm just finishing work. I should be done in 20 minutes.
2 hours later.
Hey, I'm here. I finished work. Sorry I'm late. The planning fallacy. Pro tip by Professor Girding. I always recommend that you triple the amount of time that something's gonna take. You should account for the planning fallacy. Make it a habit to triple the amount of time that you report to someone. You think it will take 10 minutes? Say it will take 30 to someone else. There's other indications of this too. The impact bias. You've been dumped. No! You think you're gonna be depressed for how long? Forever. We see this as parents all the time. Our kid is really upset and they think this is forever.
Is this going to be forever?
No.
And you realize they're gonna be fine in 20 minutes, half an hour. It's the same thing. We have this impact bias where when we experience emotions, we think that they're way more impactful and enduring than they actually are. This is why we find that friends and family members are way more accurate at predicting our behavior than ourselves. McDonald and Ross in 1997 showed this hands down with plenty of research. In relationships, friends and family members could better predict how long the relationship was going to last, how long a task will take someone. For instance, my brother, he's probably watching this video right now, but my brother will always say, I'll be there at 3. I always say, gotta give him at least an hour. I'm not trying to throw shade. I love him and I'm used to that, and you kind of translate that time. He says 3 o'clock, well, that means it's gonna be 4 o'clock at the earliest. This is just incredible evidence to show how inaccurate your self-concept can be. Now let's talk about your ideal self. Same exercise. Grab that pen and paper or use your mind, and I want you to think of 5 things about the perfect you. We did the 5 things to accurately describe yourself as you are now, but now I want you to do 5 things of the perfect you. Okay, stop. Here's the point of that exercise. Is there a big difference between the list of who you are and the list you made of the perfect you? There's this idea known as the self-discrepancy theory, meaning the bigger the gap between your current self and your imagined ideal self, the lower your self-esteem. What? Self-esteem. What is self-esteem? That is your sense of self-worth. How valuable do you think you are? Do you think that this planet is better off with you on it? Or do you think that you're just a turd on a turd cracker stinking up the place for all the other people on this planet? I hope not. So self-esteem, is it good to have or is it bad to have? Easy question, obvious answer. You want to have self-esteem. Self-esteem is very important to have. Think of it as a type of currency, but instead of buying things with it, what you're actually getting is a more enjoyable life. The higher your self-esteem, the better your life will be. We know this from life satisfaction surveys. Basically, it's almost impossible to think that you're a piece of crap and be totally happy in life. However, is there such a thing as having too much self-esteem? Is it possible that there's someone who has a really high sense of self-esteem but actually is a turd? Absolutely. In fact, we can talk about antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder.
As a specimen, yes, I'm intimidating.
How people may have an inflated sense of self and therefore they're incapable of really functioning as well as other people. But at the same time, if they have a really high sense of self-esteem, is it your job to pop that bubble? Well, only if they're breaking the law. Breaking the law, breaking the law. If they're not hurting anyone and they think they're amazing, you may feel the need to correct them, but pro tip, why? Let them live their good life. Don't get jelly. Don't be jelly because they're a piece of crap and yet they're happier than you. Don't get that in your head. All right. Here's another question. Does self-esteem predict your performance on tasks? For instance, if you have a really high self-esteem, does that mean you're really good at stuff? No! Those two are actually not connected. You could be really bad at a whole bunch of things and still think you have value. I think of some of my favorite people in life, and there's a lot of things that they stink at. Self-esteem does not predict performance. You can have someone with really high self-esteem that really stinks at a lot of things, and you can have someone with really low self-esteem that is an Olympian. There's plenty of Olympians that have struggled with self-worth. Oh, don't confuse self-esteem with self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your belief that you can do something. For instance, I like to believe that I'm relatively decent at teaching psychology. You might be disagreeing as you're watching this, but I think, hey, I'm doing an okay job. Therefore, I have self-efficacy when it comes to my teaching skills. This is your ability to do something, self-efficacy. Bushman research in 2011, a survey revealed that people seem to value self-esteem more than anything else. And this makes sense. Overly simplifying it, self-esteem is the measure of the value of your life. So heaven forbid, but when you reach life's end and you're about to die, you're probably going to look back at life and ask yourself, was it worthwhile? Did I live a valuable life? And this brings us to terror management theory. As people get older and older, they value their self-esteem more and more and more because they know that their end's coming and they want to be able to look back at life and think, that was a good life. I did good things. So part of that, you'd think that they'd be more accepting of ideas and really challenge their prejudices and their stubbornness in the past. No. If someone believed that they were going to die, they'd actually hold on to their beliefs even more. If you're about to die, that is not the time to start questioning your self-concept. If anything, you want to solidify it. Research shows when people approach the end of their life, they're less likely to change any of their prejudices or self-concepts. So if you think you're going to go into a hospice and change that racist guy's attitudes, fat chance. In fact, if anything, if you actually do start convincing him that he's been racist his entire life and his entire life has been filled with hate and he made the world a worse place, and then he dies that night, you've basically doomed him to having a horrible deathbed experience. Ugh. So once again, self-esteem is a healthy thing to have. But does self-esteem mean you're good at things? No. Does self-esteem mean that you're a good person? No. What it means is that you think you're valuable, and that's an indication that you're enjoying your life. Here's the catch-22. The mind is a tricky thing. So if you know that your life gets better if you have higher self-esteem, you probably want to raise your self-esteem. But you can't. What? Because any attempt to raise your self-esteem is this hyper-focus upon your self-esteem, and what happens is kind of the opposite. You start devaluing yourself. The more you focus on improving your self-esteem, unfortunately, your self-esteem gets lower. Why? You're kind of revealing the man behind the curtain.
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
And you're realizing that your motives are nothing more than making yourself feel better. We need a little bit of removal in order to believe that we're a good person and that we're worthwhile. So let's suppose you really enjoy volunteering your time towards a charity, but now you just learned all about self-esteem. But now you start questioning, am I doing this charity just so I feel good about myself? Well, that's kind of dirty. And your self-esteem lowers. Boop, 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 boop. So what advice can I give you then? If you want higher self-esteem, how do you do it? Here's the pop psychology of it. It's better to focus on self-efficacy. Even though self-efficacy doesn't equal self-esteem, the two do have a strong correlation. Don't focus on self-esteem, just focus on being the best you simply can and getting better at it. I'm rambling, but hey, let's move on from self-esteem because we need to talk about the self-serving bias. What? People are self-serving. You can't help it. We all are. What do we mean by that? Well, do you think you're better than average? Well, if you have a relatively high self-esteem, part of that is, yeah, I believe I'm better than average. But you know who thinks they're better than average? Most people. Which means, by definition, that can't be true. The self-serving bias, the tendency to perceive oneself favorable. It's very healthy to perceive yourself as favorable, and I hope you do. But we do this self-serving attributions. This is basically when good things happen, we attribute those as happening because of us. But when bad, crappy things happen, we tend to blame others or the environment around us. Good? It's all me. Bad? It's all you. And that is the self-serving attribution. Now to help us with this, we like to have downward comparisons. Think about speech class again. When do you want to give your speech? Do you want to go first? Typically not. Typically, you want to go right after the student that crashes and burns. You want to get the person who's, Benjamin Franklin was my dad. No, he was my, Can I go next? Because of that social comparison, we like to do downward comparison and make ourselves feel better. And this is part of the self-serving bias. We will selectively abstract the evidence that makes us feel better than average. So when we say, am I better than average? You typically look at some examples. You clearly believe you're better than. But at the same time, going back to that imaginary audience, we have something known as the personal fable. Again, this idea that we're the star of our own television show. And that makes us overly optimistic. Think of all the movies you've seen, all the television shows you've seen. You realize who the main character is, and especially if there's seasons after seasons of the show, you understand, well, that person's gonna be okay. They're not gonna be in danger. We'll apply that exact same concept to yourself, and then you start experiencing unrealistic optimism. Most people say, yeah, you shouldn't drive drunk, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't take dangerous risks. But guess what? Especially teenagers, they do it anyway. Why? Because of the personal fable. They think, I'm the main character of this story. I can't die. You shouldn't smoke. But I'm different. It's not going to affect me. I'm going to be fine. You're not. It's good to have some defensive pessimism. You don't want to be a pessimistic sod, no. But you need to have some reality in there. Again, what's the pop psychology of this? Consider feedback. Ask someone, hey, is this a good idea? Don't do that. You should really consider that. For instance, relationships. If you're in a relationship and everyone says, hey, that's a bad relationship, you probably shouldn't be in that relationship. Consider feedback. They don't understand. He's amazing. Listen to some trusted people. But let's talk about something else that really helps bolster ourselves, this whole self-serving bias. And under this category of self-serving bias comes the false consensus effect. Maybe you've been in this situation before. You assume everyone agrees with you, and so you say something like, clearly, Trump is the worst. And then you're shocked when someone interrupts and says, President Trump was not the worst, is not the worst, and the world would be beneficial if we could have Emperor President Trump. And they actually believe that. But you assume that everyone agrees with you. You ever have someone stand up and just go on and on and on and preach about their beliefs, just assuming everyone at the table agrees with you? You ever go to the over-religious family members and they're just talking about God this or God that? Or maybe the other way around. You go to the atheistic family members' dinner table and they're talking about how they can't believe anyone be Christian, and you're awkwardly sitting there. This is known as the false consensus effect, where we naturally believe that those around us agree with us because we think we're very sane, and therefore if we're around sane people, we gotta have the same ideas, right? Wrong. Similar but different is the false uniqueness effect. We all think we're unique. No one's better at Fortnite than me. And while we're talking about it, I'm also really good at volleyball too. Woo! You think that you're unique, not realizing that there may be someone at the table in the room in your classroom could totally kick your tuchus at Fortnite or volleyball or whatever. So if these two things seem opposite, how can they both be compatible? How can you have a false consensus effect where you believe everyone agrees with you, but then also believe you're unique? They seem to contradict. Here's the answer to that question, because this would be a great essay question. Like if you're in my class and you were about to take a test, I think this would be a pretty good essay question for you to answer, meaning it's going to be an essay question. Here's the difference. We use false consensus effect when it's beliefs, ideas. But when it comes to our skills and our abilities, we have the false uniqueness effect. So when it comes to beliefs, false consensus. When it comes to abilities, false uniqueness. I hope that difference is obvious. So the last thing we're going to talk about is self-presentation. Let me ask you a question. You ever been on social media and type a status? Feeling kind of cute. Might delete later. But then you rethink your wording and erase it, and you rewrote the same tweet, the same Instagram, the same whatever, face, tweeters, Instabook, whatever you're using. You ever write a status and then just erase it right away and have to rewrite it so many times? It's because you're consciously aware of what you'll look like if you post that. How will people respond to this? We do the same thing in person-to-person, face-to-face life. If you're going over grandma's house, you're probably going to act differently than if you go to your best friend's house. This is known as self-presentation, the act of expressing oneself and behaving in ways designed to create a favorable impression. Now, this is similar to self-monitoring, but self-monitoring is the conscious effort of self-presentation. We don't consciously know that we're doing self-presentation. It's just a habit that we learn. We're very adaptable creatures as human beings. So when we go in one situation, we wear one chameleon face. When we're in another situation, we put on a totally different face. We do this all the time, whether we mean to or not. Be forewarned. If you're doing self-monitoring too much, that is an indication, according to Leon and Hawkins in 2006, those people are less likely to be committed in relationships. You're basically too much of a chameleon. You're trying to blend in too much instead of coming to a core self-concept. It's totally healthy to adapt, but don't be so obsessed with it that there is not a consistent self. Otherwise, you may be headed towards travesty. According to research, let's talk about self-handicapping. You probably have a test coming up. You ever do this? You come into the test like, oh, I didn't even study for this test. I hope I don't bomb. Or maybe it's a race like, whew, I didn't train for this race at all. People are basically bragging about how poorly prepared they are. Why? Why do people do this? It drives me crazy. It's known as self-handicapping. It's protecting your self-image with behaviors that create a nice, convenient excuse as to why you may do bad. So if you do fail this test, or you do lose that race, you can just say, well, you see, I told you. I didn't even prepare for it. But if you win, it's that much sweeter with the extra little cinnamon, sweet, sugary brown sugar, because you say, not only did I win, but I didn't even prepare for this. I'm so smart. I'm so fast. I'm so good. Stop it. Drives me crazy. Self-handicapping? Just study for the ding-dang test. I don't care how little you prepared for the test. Now, if you're preparing for the test and working your ass off and you still do bad, we should have a conversation. Check me out. I'm here to help. Self-control. Do you have self-control or do you have self-control problems? It's 2 a.m. You're watching some Netflix and you think, man, I should just go to sleep, but I got a rumbly in my tumbly and I just want to eat. So you just dive into those Chips Ahoy cookies. Now, Oreos, because they're vegan. You just dive into those Oreos. What happened to that self-control? You were fine not eating the cookies in the middle of the day, but it's not until 2 a.m. that you cave. Self-control. Do you have a lot of it or do you have a little of it? Let me cut to the chase and what research says. Self-control is a muscle. Self-control. What do I mean that self-control is a muscle? Well, just like any muscle, it can get exhausted. So if you're practicing a lot of self-control at once, it's gonna get harder and harder and harder and harder. So if you have someone nagging you and nagging you and nagging you, you're more likely to cave because they're waning on you. However, the more you exercise those muscles, the more self-control you have. Focus! But you wanna do a slow, gradual thing. Just like with a muscle, you shouldn't walk into a gym and say, put all the weights on the barbell. I've never worked out in my life. You're gonna get crushed under those weights.
Put another set of weights on there. I can take it.
It's the same thing with self-control. Start small and start expanding slowly but surely. That was a lot. We talked about the spotlight effect, we talked about self-concept, self-esteem, the self-serving bias, all these self-vocabulary terms. Thanks for joining me. I hope I see you next time. I love this stuff, but I'm out of here.